being a hateful person, she's a liar as well. You know damn right well what that was. She wasn't playing the ball. She took an opportunity to take a shot at someone based on the color of their skin and their belief system, which I thought in America we were against. And it just so happens that she did it against a white person. And for some reason in this country, it has become fashionable to be racist against white people and get a pass. The actions alone should be a suspension. The comments after that should be expulsion. If I was...
Most controversies fade after a few days, but this one somehow keeps getting hotter. The Carrington-Sophie Cunningham situation has continued to divide WNBA fans, and now Tyrus has entered the conversation with a reaction that could reopen everything. But there is a reason this particular moment has people looking back at several incidents involving Carrington. What did Tyrus notice, and why is this suddenly bigger than Sophie Cunningham?
The white privilege comment. I would actually say that this is black privilege, to be totally honest with you, because her posting this white racist comment right after assaulting Sophie Cunningham on the court is actually black privilege, because she knows the WNBA won't do a single thing of significance about it. And imagine if the roles were reversed. If Sophie made a comment similar to this, then she'd likely never play again. It's quite sad that the WNBA is the joke that it is, because it does have real star players. It does have star talent. Some of those being Caitlin Clark, some of those being Sophie Cunningham. But rather than leaning into that, which is what the audience, the target market, really wants them to do from a business operational standpoint, they're like desperate on just folding like a lawn chair. I don't understand.
The controversy surrounding DiJonai Carrington has reached the point where the original incident almost feels like only the beginning. What started as another heated moment on a WNBA court has continued to dominate conversations days later, largely because fans are no longer looking at one isolated play.
Punch in the throat, that could kill him, right? And the WNBA, right? The people that run that league, if you're DiJonai here and you have a foul like that, I don't want to hear about, okay, that's a flagrant 2 and you get this sort of fine. She should be suspended for the rest of the season, because this isn't, as you said, Tommy, a whoops. This is intentional. This was targeting Sophie Cunningham. And I don't care if the player is white or black. It does not matter. When you do this to somebody, this is horrible for the league.
They are looking at a series of moments, the reactions surrounding them, and the uncomfortable question of whether the league is being consistent when it comes to protecting its players.
Here's the thing. Why is DiJonai Carrington even in this game? This all could have been avoided if the league suspended her, as they should have, for the flagrant 2 foul against Sophie Cunningham. But no, that never happened. Also, the league never did anything about the posting on social media after she was ejected. That's against WNBA policy. She broke a rule. But guess what? No suspension, no fine, nothing. What kind of message does the WNBA continue to send? Why do you have rules?
And that is exactly where Tyrus enters the picture. The outspoken commentator has never been known for quietly watching a sports controversy unfold from the sidelines. When he believes something has crossed a line, he tends to make his position very clear, and this time, his attention turned toward Carrington and the broader discussion surrounding physical incidents involving WNBA players.
To an athlete and then afterwards say privilege or something like that, or was rude to you on a network and said the only reason why they kicked me off the network is because of white privilege, I'd be fired. So I think she should be fired, but the WNBA has become a league of hate, and if there's a European league out there, I would start reaching out to some of these women who just want to play basketball and live their lives. It's just it's a bad league. The government should look into, because the entire league is funded by a men's league, ironically. Yeah. Maybe cut out funding and let them, since they really only want a certain type of person in that league, and they should fund themselves.
The Sophie Cunningham situation became particularly explosive because Cunningham has developed a reputation for playing with plenty of physicality herself. She is not exactly the type of player fans associate with avoiding contact. She competes hard, gets into the action, and has never appeared particularly interested in making herself invisible on the court. What made the reaction so complicated was that once Sophie Cunningham became part of the conversation, the debate immediately moved beyond the question of who started the confrontation. Fans were no longer focused on a single moment. Instead, they began asking whether the same standard was being applied consistently to every player involved. Supporters pushed back against what they considered an exaggerated narrative, arguing that isolated clips could easily create a misleading picture when they were removed from the context of an entire game. Critics, however, believed the growing collection of footage suggested that there was something more consistent happening and wanted the league to address it more seriously.
Sophie Cunningham had taken out a black player, had clotheslined her just like we saw there, and then had immediately gone to the locker room and tweeted black privilege when she was kicked out of the game. How quickly do you think the WNBA would have reacted? I doubt she would have been allowed to play for the rest of the year. This is an example of straight up, blatant, I think, racist behavior from the WNBA.
Naturally, social media transformed the entire discussion into something resembling a courtroom, where everyone somehow became the judge, jury, prosecutor, defense attorney, and expert referee before the next possession had even finished. Yet underneath all the arguments, jokes, reaction videos, and competing interpretations was a legitimate question about where the line should be drawn between aggressive basketball and unnecessary physicality. The WNBA is filled with players who compete at an extremely high level, and physical contact is an unavoidable part of that competition. Players fight through screens, battle for rebounds, absorb hard fouls, and occasionally lose their tempers when emotions become intense, so nobody realistically expects professional basketball to resemble a leisurely afternoon at a yoga retreat. However, there is an important difference between playing physically and creating situations in which opponents or fans begin to believe that a particular player is deliberately connecting it to everything they remember from previous games. That helps explain why the Carrington controversy has continued to generate discussion long after the original incident. Tyrus added another significant layer to the situation because his reaction was not simply about one confrontation. His comments tapped into a much broader frustration among fans who believe that certain physical plays receive dramatically different reactions depending on which players are involved.
This was done because Sophie Cunningham stood up for women, saying that men shouldn't play against women in sports because there is obviously a chromosome advantage, just like you see with steroids, a chemical advantage. And I'll leave it here. Serena Williams, I saw this clip just this week. 2013, she's on David Letterman when Letterman hosted the Late Show. And she was asked, would you play Andy Murray, who was a big deal in tennis, British guy in tennis? She said, no, I wouldn't. Andy asked me to do it. I would lose 6-love. In other words, I would get wiped out in 15 minutes.
Whether that perception is completely fair is another question, but it has become increasingly difficult to ignore because social media gives fans the ability to compare incidents instantly. A controversial play that once might have disappeared after the final buzzer can now be recorded, clipped, slowed down, reposted, analyzed, and debated thousands of times before the players have even left the arena. Within hours, commentators can be discussing the footage, former players can be offering their opinions, and fans can be searching through old games to find examples that either support or challenge the narrative. By the following day, someone has usually produced a 10-minute breakdown featuring freeze frames, circles, arrows, and enough digital evidence to make the entire thing look like an investigation into an international conspiracy. That is the environment Tyrus stepped into, and it explains why his reaction received so much attention. By the time he entered the conversation, the controversy had already grown beyond the original moment. His comments, "She is competitive, physical, and willing to engage in the rougher side of basketball," which has made her both popular with certain fans and frustrating to others. Consequently, when Cunningham became involved in this controversy, supporters and critics immediately approached the situation from very different perspectives.
Sophie Cunningham, I don't care if the player is white or black, it does not matter. When you do this to somebody, this is horrible for the league. Obviously, this was done because Sophie Cunningham stood up for women, saying that men shouldn't play against women in sports because there is obviously a chromosome advantage, just like you see with steroids, a chemical advantage. And I'll leave it here. Serena Williams, I saw this clip just this week. 2013, she's on David Letterman when Letterman hosted the Late Show. And she was asked, would you play Andy Murray, who was a big deal in tennis, British guy in tennis? She said, no, I wouldn't. Andy asked me to.
Some fans viewed Cunningham primarily as the player on the receiving end of an incident they considered excessive, while others pointed out that she is hardly unfamiliar with physical basketball and has been involved in her own heated moments. That disagreement created another layer to the debate because the conversation was no longer simply about Carrington's actions. It became a discussion about whether the same standards should apply to everyone, regardless of reputation. If the WNBA wants to continue attracting a larger audience, consistency in officiating and discipline becomes increasingly important because greater attention means every controversial decision will receive significantly more scrutiny. There was a time when a questionable play might have generated a few conversations among fans before disappearing into the history of the season. That reality has changed dramatically. Today, a single camera angle can become a viral post almost instantly, and once the footage begins circulating, there is no guarantee that the conversation will end when the game does. Instead, the incident can dominate social media for days, with commentators offering competing interpretations, former athletes weighing in, and fans digging through old footage in search of evidence that supports their position. By the time the original players are preparing for their next game, the internet may still be arguing about something that happened several days earlier.
I don't think any of the things that have been happening this season is happening in a vacuum. And so it spills out in these ways. We could look to the same type of foul that Sophie Cunningham did, race down the court to foul JC Sheldon last year after she was beefing with Caitlin Clark, and she went down there and whacked her to send a message, don't play with my teammate. And it turned into the beginnings of now explosive fame and monetary opportunity for Sophie Cunningham.
Sophie did get the 1 million followers, and now she's all these endorsements from being this enforcer who's not scared and not afraid, and this cool woman who will knock you out for her teammate. If you look,
That is precisely the situation surrounding Carrington. Tyrus's reaction arrived at a moment when the controversy was already larger than the original incident, which is why his comments attracted so much attention. He effectively challenged the idea that these moments should simply be dismissed as normal parts of basketball, and instead raised questions about accountability and whether repeated physical confrontations deserve greater scrutiny. At the same time, there is another side to the discussion that deserves consideration because Carrington is certainly not the first player to become the center of a social media controversy after an aggressive play, and she will not be the last. Basketball is an emotional sport, and players compete at an extraordinary level where decisions are often made within fractions of a second. Contact that looks intentional or excessive from one camera angle can sometimes appear very different when did the player react instinctively to an opponent, or was there something more deliberate behind the action? Those questions cannot always be answered from a short viral clip, and that is where the conversation becomes much more complicated than social media often allows.
DiJonai Carrington, after clotheslining Sophie Cunningham, running into the locker room, screaming, "That's white privilege!" Then tweeting 8/23, threatening Sophie Cunningham and the Indiana Fever. DiJonai Carrington now comes out and clarifies what she means when she says white privilege for the Indiana Fever. And shame on all of us, folks. DiJonai Carrington is incredibly smart. She went to school on an athletic scholarship.
The biggest problem with online debates is that they tend to reward certainty rather than nuance. Saying that more context is needed rarely attracts the same attention as declaring that someone is obviously guilty or obviously innocent. Fans want heroes, villains, and definitive answers, sometimes before officials have even had the opportunity to review the play properly. Once a player develops a particular reputation, that reputation can also influence how every future incident is interpreted. A hard foul becomes evidence of a pattern, an argument becomes confirmation of a player's temperament, and even a confrontation that might previously have been ignored suddenly becomes another piece of a much larger case. That may be the most significant development in the Carrington controversy because fans are no longer necessarily judging each incident, while her supporters can argue that the controversy has grown far beyond the actual events that started it. In the middle of that disagreement is the WNBA itself, which now has to navigate a growing demand for consistency without allowing every controversial moment to become a referendum on the entire league. Fans are not simply asking whether Carrington should face consequences. They are asking whether every player would receive the same treatment if the circumstances were reversed, and that distinction is extremely important.
Carrington, about an hour ago, said, "I've never once claimed that the assessment of the foul was white privilege. That was your assumption. Try exercising your critical thinking skills. I know you study psychology. Furthermore, I'm the last thing from ignorant or asinine when it comes to speaking on white privilege. Do your research on that one. I actually went to school, one of the top universities, might I add, to educate myself on this exact subject. I would never use that term as a rhetorical weapon, knowing the historical and social weight it holds.
If the league expects players to compete physically, then the boundaries surrounding that physicality need to be understandable. If certain conduct crosses the line, disciplinary measures need to be applied consistently, and if a particular incident does not cross the line, the league also needs to communicate that clearly enough that fans understand why. Otherwise, every controversial play creates another opportunity for accusations of favoritism, inconsistency, or selective enforcement. And those accusations can become particularly damaging when they continue accumulating over time. This matters even more because the WNBA is operating under a level of attention that would have while simultaneously changing what people are talking about. Instead of conversations being dominated by outstanding performances, tactical decisions, emerging stars, and competitive games, discussions can quickly become centered on officiating, confrontations, technical fouls, suspensions, and disciplinary decisions. The attention may be enormous, but it is not necessarily the kind of attention a league wants to depend on. That is why the Carrington situation matters beyond Carrington herself. The larger issue is becoming the WNBA's approach to physicality and whether the standards are clear enough for players, officials, and fans to understand.
So I'll just say it. DiJonai Carrington is not good for the WNBA's brand, right? Like, shouldn't be good for the WNBA's brand. And the reason I bring that up is because in the aftermath of what happened against the Fever, I saw some takes along the lines of, you know, the league is being hijacked and we have to protect our brand. And I understand that blowback to maybe the broader discussions around the league, but it confused me why it was specifically being applied to DiJonai Carrington.
When a player becomes involved in multiple controversial moments, should every incident be judged completely independently, or should a broader pattern influence how the league evaluates the situation? There is no simple answer, but the question is becoming increasingly difficult to avoid. The WNBA cannot control every debate that takes place online, and it certainly cannot stop fans from replaying controversial moments. The footage does not disappear, the arguments do not disappear, and the opinions certainly do not disappear. That is why this controversy has continued days later, and Tyrus's involvement has only pushed it back into the spotlight. The question is no longer simply what happened between DJ Carrington and Sophie Cunningham. The more significant question is whether the controversy has exposed a deeper disagreement about how physicality should be handled across the WNBA and whether fans believe the league is applying its standards consistently. And if more footage continues to surface, more players join the discussion, and more commentators weigh in, this story may be far from finished. And that is where the situation could become even more interesting. Because once a controversy reaches this level, the next incident can completely change the conversation.
Carrington made a basketball play, and the refs made a basketball ruling. So can we
Was that a basketball play? Acho? Come on, dog. Come on, you know better than that.
stick to basketball for a moment? Basketball play. She was attempting to go for the ball, at least she said so. She missed, and she missed egregiously. She missed, and she flagrantly...
She missed in a manner that you can't say it's a basketball play. Emmanuel, come on. Come on, man. Use that... Come on.
Hit Sophie Cunningham in the head. Now, flagrant 2, by definition, if you hit somebody with so much force that it could lead to injury, and if it doesn't appear to be a play on the ball.
Yeah.
Though DiJonai...
Carrington does not necessarily have to be involved in another major confrontation for the debate to continue. All it takes is another controversial play involving another player for fans to immediately start comparing the two situations, bringing the same questions about consistency right back into the spotlight. That is also why Tyrus's reaction matters beyond the immediate criticism. His comments have given the controversy another life at a time when many people expected the conversation to finally cool down. For Cunningham, the situation has also created an unexpected spotlight. What began as one confrontation has turned into a much broader discussion about the way physicality is perceived differently depending on the player, the opponent, and the circumstances surrounding the incident. And that may be the reason this story refuses to disappear. So while the original confrontation may eventually fade from the headlines, the questions surrounding it are unlikely to disappear so easily. Was this simply intense basketball that became bigger because of social media, or did it expose a genuine problem with consistency that the league can no longer afford to ignore? And if another controversial incident happens tomorrow, will fans see it differently because of everything that has happened this week?